Anyway, that's something to consider for yourselves as performers. When you go to play on the blues, or really anything, bringing in these elements of call and response and statement resolution, thinking of that, it can give you some direction that's a lot more exciting and creative than maybe just sometimes we get caught up in thinking about like what scales we're playing or how fast we can play or something like that. Okay, hey arrangers, I hope you all are doing well. So for this week, for our lead sheets, we're going to be doing the blues form. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the blues. And I'm going to try and get a whole lot of information into this video. And of course, we could spend a whole year on just the blues, but we're going to be, I want to kind of get the main elements into this video so that you can be writing your own blueses this week. So very quickly, a kind of general history of the blues. The blues comes from African American musical tradition, and the first knowledge we have of the blues is from probably sometime in the late 1800s is when it probably came to exist, and it's uniquely African American. It has a lot of elements of African music in it, but the blues as we know it did not come to exist until the United States. And so I'm going to just recommend some books that I would strongly encourage you to check out to learn more about the blues. The first one is by someone named Amiri Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones. And he wrote he wrote a number of great books, but this one is called Blues People. And this is a classic in music study, in African American studies. So I would really encourage you to get this book and read it. Some other great books. This here is called The Music of Black Americans by Eileen Southern. And this is also a classic text. It has so much detail in it. It is one of the few books I've read multiple times. And it's a great book, and it has a lot of great information about African American music history and also specifically the blues. One last book recommendation, and this is called The History of Jazz by Ted Gioia. And this is, he's a really good writer and has a lot of good information, covers a lot of ground very succinctly. So I would recommend all three of these books. And again, with a lot of this stuff, you know, it can seem overwhelming to be thinking about reading all three of these books from cover to cover. And of course, that's great. It's also okay to just, get one of these books and open up to some pages and just read and see what you learn from a few pages. You'll get a lot of good information that way. So don't let if you are someone who gets intimidated by the length of a book and not having enough time, just keeping it around and occasionally glancing at a few pages can be really informative and interesting for you. Okay, so the blues. It began as a rural sort of music, and it was typically most often it was just one person singing and playing guitar for themselves. So because of that, the phrase lengths could really vary because the person only had to accompany themselves. So it's not like they had to worry about keeping everybody together. They're just playing for themselves. And because of that, they might sing a song where a blues where one time a phrase length might be extra long and another time it might be shorter. So for instance, I'm going to give the example a great classic traditional rural blues from Robert Johnson called Crossroad Blues. And let's just listen to a little bit of it and just pay attention to the phrase lengths for a sec. So you could hear, I'm sure you recognize the blues form in there, but it's not 12 bars, and sometimes there's extra beats thrown in, extra measures, and that was the freedom of this music as a rural music. It eventually. Well, before I go there, let's talk about the form of the blues. So, a typical quintessential blues typically has three lines. Usually there's some sort of statement, usually about something that is a problem, though not always, but usually some sort of a problem. And then the next line is a repetition of that statement. And then the third line is some sort of resolution of that statement. So for example, like T-Bone Walker's Stormy Monday Blues, the statement would be, they call it Stormy Monday and Tuesday's just as bad. And then that repeats. They call it Stormy Monday, Tuesday's just as bad. And then there's a resolution. Wednesday's worse and Thursday's oh so sad. So I'm just going to write that here on this board. We've got statement. They call it Stormy Monday, Tuesday's just as bad. Statement. They call it Stormy Monday, Tuesday's just as bad. Resolution. Wednesday's worse, Thursday's oh so sad. So let's listen to a little bit of Stormy Monday Blues as an example. Here it is.
It's a little number I had the pleasure of writing years ago, and it's very, very standard number. Now, everybody do this number, which makes me very happy because I put a little royalties in my pocket. But it makes me happy to know that I'm the composer.
It's T-Bone Walker.
They call it Stormy Monday.
Statement.
Tuesday's just as bad. Call it Stormy Monday. And baby, Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse, and Thursday's oh so sad.
We'll do another verse. Here we go.
Well, the eagle flies so brightly, and Saturday I go out to play.
Okay. So that's T-Bone Walker, Stormy Monday Blues. This statement resolution is a really important aspect of the blues form. Another important aspect of the form is the idea of call and response. Now, this is something that comes from African tradition, and it is a part of African American musical tradition. You'll hear it in the Black church. You will hear it in all, contemporary popular music today. The idea of call and response. So that's another element that we can bring to this music. If we look at Stormy Monday Blues, we can think of the call and response in two different ways. The first way is thinking of just that line. They call it Stormy Monday. We can think of that as the call. And then Tuesday's just as bad as the response. So if we think of it that way, it's they call it Stormy Monday. That's call. Tuesday's just as bad. Response. They call it Stormy Monday. Call. Tuesday's just as bad. Response. Wednesday's worse. Call. Thursday's oh so sad. Response. That's one way to look at it. Another way is to think of each line as a call. They call it Stormy Monday and Tuesday's just as bad. That's a call. And then if you notice in the recording, then you would hear you'll either hear oftentimes the piano or guitar or saxophone play a little fill after the sung line. And that fill can be thought of as the response. So, and that's a major part of the music too. And sometimes I've heard people argue about which is the call and which is the response, which way to think of it. And I think they can simultaneously exist. We can think of it, the call and response occurring both ways. So let's listen again to some of this, just to get a sense of some of that call and response. Here's in the guitar solo. All right. So we've talked about statement resolution, talked about call and response. Some other elements that are common to blues. You might notice the guitar is kind of getting an almost voice-like quality sometimes. And that's something that actually comes from African musical tradition. So voice-like timbre. Another thing that we're hearing, and this is really neat, the the harmony in blues is oftentimes dominant seventh chords. So are treated as tonic. So we'll have the one chord with a flat seven on it. And that's really kind of crazy when you think about it. And it's crazy in that that's just different than, what we learn in Western European European music theory, where there's no Mozart piece that ends on a dominant seven chord. That doesn't happen in Bach. The theory is generally geared at the 5/7 chord, the dominant seven chord, resolves to a one chord. But in the blues, it never resolves. That is the resolution, the dominant seventh chord. So I'm just going to call it dominant seventh as tonic, and we'll get into some details about what that means in the specifics of the form in a minute. But I want to get at just some of these elements. Another thing is the use of pentatonic scales or the blues scale. So that, again, something that comes from African music. So pentatonic scale and blue notes. So those are often like, if we were to look at a blues scale, like here in C, we've got C, E flat, F, F sharp, G, B flat, and C. If we were to play just a regular pentatonic scale, a C minor pentatonic scale would be C, E flat, F, G, B flat, C. But that F sharp is kind of the blue note. So here, let's see. Is my keyboard? Let's see if this is playing. Well, it might not be. Let me see if that's coming through. There we go. So, like, here's the dominant chord. Here's C7, right? And here's a C blues scale. So we recognize that sound. But you'll notice, this scale doesn't really go with that chord change. We hear C7, and what we would normally think of as going with that chord change would be a C mixolydian scale. Instead, we've got this E flat, this F sharp, right? And that's the one chord. That's the resolved chord. It ends on this chord. So that's really neat, thinking about the scale, the blues scale, and how that one scale will get you over the whole blues progression. So then, I could go to the 4 chord, and I still use that scale. And so we're getting at dealing with tonal centers. And that's a neat concept. So even when the notes of the scale clashes with the chord change, we're feeling the whole tonality of the music. And so that's really neat, a neat aspect of the blues. Yeah. So those are some of the elements that you can bring to your writing when you go to think about incorporating the blues into your music. And this is a little different than how you may have learned blues when when you first are learning about blues. They tend to teach you, well, blues is a 12-bar form, and it's the one chord, and then you go to the 4 chord, and then you go to the 1 chord, and then you go to the 5 chord and 4 chord, or whatever, or maybe the 2-5-1. And that's certainly good to know. That's the standard blues. We'll talk about it in a sec. That's what happens in, if you go to a jam session and someone calls a blues, there's a certain 12-bar form. But I don't want us to be thinking of that as being what defines a blues, because it's not. What really is defining the blues is the statement resolution, right? The call and response elements, and then using things, potentially the dominant seventh as the primary tonality. The use of pentatonic scales and blue notes, the incorporation of voice-like timbres. These are the elements that really can make something feel like a blues. We often are sitting on one chord for a lengthier period in a blues. So oftentimes another element is drone, kind of a drone sound. As opposed to, moving the harmony around a whole bunch, we end up with... Right? That kind of thing. Or in the Crossroad blues, we're hearing it... It's really... we'll be sitting on that one chord for a long time. So these are all elements to think about when you go to write your blueses. Okay. Now let's move on to the 12-bar form. So in the early 20th century, there was a great migration of African Americans from rural areas to the cities. And this music became... an urban music. It became played in places with bands. So it's no longer just one person with a guitar accompanying themselves. All of a sudden you have multiple people playing this music together at the same time. And so when you had one person just playing for themselves, they can vary the form however they want every time they play, every time they do a song if they want. But when you've got multiple people, if one person's playing an 11.5 bar blues and the other person's playing a 12.5 bar blues, they're going to be off somewhere. So the music got kind of standardized. Let me erase this and go over how it happened, what basically became the standard. Because you've got bass players now, you've got drummers, you've got piano players, you've got people all playing together. So they ended up basically settling on 4 bars per phrase. So you end up with a 4-bar statement, a 4-bar repetition of that statement, and then a 4-bar resolution. So typically we'll have the one chord and its dominant as our statement. And then on the repetition, we have the 4 chord for 2 bars and then back to the 1 chord. And then for the resolution, we have the 5 chord for 2 bars and then the 1 chord. Now there's a zillion ways to vary this. But this is the standard 12-bar blues, right? 4-bar phrases. 3 phrases of 4 bars each equals 12 bars. So this is the most basic version. In traditional blues, we tend to make So by that I'm saying the more like blues, a blues band is going to be playing more often a 5-4-1 turnaround. A jazz band, a jazz group is more likely to play a 2-5-1 there. And sometimes we'll lead to the sixth chord. We'll get into some of the various ways this music can change. But at the heart of it is this. So that's a 12-bar blues. Let's listen to some examples. The first one I want to play for you is a great Horace Silver blues called Filthy McNasty. He puts a great intro on it. And then one thing to listen for as you're listening to this, pay attention to the statement resolution. Also, pay attention to the use of call and response in this recording. You'll hear call and response happening on multiple levels because it's riff based. So you can think of it as a big call and response. You can think of it as tiny calls and responses. And you could hear it different ways. You could hear it multiple ways at the same time. But I think the call and response element is really useful. And you'll also hear, I don't think we'll have time to really listen too much of it, but I'll play you a little bit of the piano solo. Because Horace, as he's improvising, you can tell that he's thinking about statement, resolution. Okay.
We'd like to inform you, those of you who just came in, we're recording up here this evening, live, we hope, from the Village Gate. We'd like for you all to help us get in the groove. Let your hair down and come on and get in the music with us. We would like to do for you at this time a brand new composition of ours, written about a mythical young man of rather dubious character. We'd like to have you all join in with us on this one and help us find the groove by patting your feet or popping your fingers or clapping your hands or shaking your heads or shaking whatever else you want to shake. While we do a little thing we call Filthy McNasty.
So just to break that down, in terms of the statements, you've got boop bop doo dop. You could think of that as the call. Boop bop doo down. You can think of that as the response, and that happens a bunch of times. So you can think of it as doing. You can think of those together as a call, and then it happening again as a response. Then you've got the piano part happening too. You can think of that as a response, and so you've got all these little elements that come together that allow you to think of the call and response in different ways. And then it all comes, you get that, and that's a really great resolution. So anyway, I want to jump to the piano solo just so you can hear how Horace is thinking about that even when he's improvising. Okay. Well, he kind of goes away from it for a little bit. But anyway, that's something to consider for yourselves as performers. When you go to play on the blues, or really anything, bringing in these elements of call and response and statement resolution, thinking of that, it can give you some direction that's a lot more exciting and creative than maybe just sometimes we get caught up in thinking about like what scales we're playing or how fast we can play or something like that. So this is a way to think about playing the song. Okay, some more examples. I want to play you an Ornette Coleman tune called Ramblin', and we'll just listen to the main melody on it. But one thing that's so neat about Ornette's approach is it really seems to harken back to like the traditional rural blues. You've got the elements of the drone. It doesn't even go to the 5 chord. It just does the 1 chord and the 4 chord. But you do have a statement resolution, you've got the drone. You'll hear it. So this is Ornette Coleman, Ramblin'. So Ornette Coleman, Ramblin'. So it's amazing, it's they're really harkening back to traditional rural blues, because there's just bass without any chordal instrument. They're able to really vary the form from chorus to chorus, and because they're all listening to each other very carefully and play together so much. You've got the sense of drone. You've got statement resolution. It never really goes to the 5 chord. You have some call and response. Ba ba da ba da ba ba da ba dum ba 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 da bo ba do ba da ba ba. Right, there's kind of a call to that in response. It's funny though. There's a certain element where it reminds me of like Charlie Parker or Bebop in a way, in terms of those 8th notes. But it's got that drone going, and it's got the voice-like timbre in the solo especially. So a real neat way to kind of bring in that traditional blues. So now for another take on the blues, we're going to listen to some Herbie Hancock. This is a song he originally wrote called Watermelon Man, and he was thinking about, he has said he was thinking about like the call of like a watermelon vendor in the street going, "Hey, watermelon man." So using that as kind of the main call and response. And then you'll hear, though, what's interesting about this form is it's statement resolution, but the resolution is extended by an extra 4 bars. So instead of it being a 12-bar blues form, it ends up being a 16-bar blues form. And this is a cool version too, because you'll hear this is he first recorded it before this, but this is the version he did off Headhunters. So this is kind of funky. It's got a pretty awesome flute introduction, and anyway, here's Watermelon Man. Okay, I'm enjoying myself, but I need to make this video. But I recommend this whole album, Headhunters, Herbie Hancock. So another approach to the blues is to here's kind of more of a bebop approach to the blues. This is Charlie Parker, Blues for Alice. Now what Charlie Parker did is he would use a lot of additional 2/5s. So with this tune, what he would do is he would do a 2/5 progression to this chord, and then a 2/5 to that 2/5, then a 2/5 to that 2/5. So you end up with a bunch of 2/5s, and end up using a bunch of cycles. I think I had sent out a cycle sheet in this class, common chord cycles. So he's using like the whole step cycle here, and then like a half step cycle. So I'll just play through it with you a little bit. But when you hear it, it almost doesn't really sound like a blues in a lot of ways. But he is hitting the one chord, and he even makes it major, at least often. We'll make that major, and then they'll do a string of 2/5s, and then they'll land on the 4 chord, and then they'll land on a 2/5 to the 1 here. So just to go through the progression, this is Blues for Alice. So it's like F major 7, right? And then you end up with E half diminished to A7, D minor 7 to G7, C minor 7 to F7, and then you hit the 4 chord, B flat 7, and then that goes to minor, B flat minor 7 to E flat 7, then A minor 7 to D7, then A flat minor 7 to D flat 7, right? So a bunch of the half step cycle, and then G minor 7, right? That's the 2 chord in bar 9. C7, that's the 5 chord, and then we are back to the 1 chord. So that's what the progression is. So just to sort of hear kind of the opposite extreme from the Ornette Coleman Ramblin', where he brought it down to just 2 chords. Here with Charlie Parker, he's managed to modulate to a whole bunch of keys very briefly. So this is Blues for Alice. Anyway, so that's another approach. You can also use this form to make songs that really don't sound like blueses. There's a tune that I think of it as a blues, but I don't think anyone listening to it would be like, yeah, that's a cool blues. But I structurally think of it as a blues. It's a Wayne Shorter composition called Witch Hunt. It has an awesome introduction, and then you'll hear the main tune come in. And it's like, it's a 24 bar form, but I really hear it as statement, statement, resolution. And what I'm hearing is definitely the statement has a 4 bar call, and then a 4 bar response. Then I hear a 4 bar call, and then a 4 bar response. And then the resolution to me is like 8 bars. And actually, I mean, the resolution is kind of a 4 bar call and response now that I think about it. It's a different call and response than what we had earlier, but it is a call and response. So you end up with a 24 bar form instead of a 12 bar form, and it doesn't go to the traditional chords. Instead of the 4 it's a minor blues, I guess you would think of it. It's like C minor for 8 bars. Then it goes to an E flat 7 chord for 4 bars. So it's not the 4 chord, it's like the 3 chord. And then it comes back to the C minor. And then it does this descending walk down. I will only think. It's like G flat 7, F7, E7, E flat 7. And then for the resolution, it's like, and that's for the resolution, and then it goes to basically like A flat minor, like A major over A flat, something like that for the response. But anyway, so it's a 24 bar form that might not initially sound like a blues, but it really is structured that way, and I think that's what really ties the room together with it. So this is Wayne Shorter's Witch Hunt, also off a classic album. It's from Speak No Evil by Wayne Shorter. Man. Anyway, and I'm just gonna say, there's just so many great blueses out there, and I encourage you to check them out. Check out some Ellington blueses, some Mingus blueses, some Monk blueses, just all the different ways cats approach this stuff. I'm gonna play you a couple of mine that just because I know them. I remember writing them, so I kind of know what I was thinking about. And that way, also, if you are interested in learning about them, I'm happy to answer any questions for you. I can send you charts. The first blues of mine I want to play for you is called "Laugh at Yourself," and this is one that, again, it's kind of using a lot of. It sounds like a blues, and it's definitely thinking in terms of statement, resolution. But again, it has this kind of extended resolution, and the second statement doesn't go to a 4 chord. I stay on the 1 chord. So it's an example, though. I think if someone were to hear it, people say, it sounds like a blues. So that's because it's got these elements in there. So anyway, this is "Laugh at Yourself." So that was Mike Mossman, definitely doing some voice-like timbre stuff. The song's called "Laugh at Yourself," so he was making some laugh sounds. Mike Mossman on the trumpet. That was Antonio Hart on the alto saxophone. So that's "Laugh at Yourself," and that's one of mine from a while back. But a more recent composition of mine I want to also share with you all is called "Blues and the Alternative Fact." And this is the longest blues form I've ever written. It is, I think, like 55 bar blues form. It definitely is, I'm clearly thinking about statement resolution. But I'm also thinking about the drone thing. And also, harmonically taking it some different places. So you don't have to incorporate every single element that is part of a traditional blues into your composition. Sometimes you might pick and choose a few. So you might find it really useful to like make a list of just like elements of this music that you can bring in. And then, choose from those of some ideas for things to really exploit. You might write a composition that's really digging into voice-like timbres. You might write one that's really digging into call and response. You might write something that's really digging into statement resolution. There's so many possibilities. You might dig into the blue notes of the pentatonic scale. Anyway, so this is Blues and the Alternative Fact. I'll play it. And let me I'll just pause it for a second. We'll go back. So even though that may have felt like a whole statement, that was actually just the call. And then we're going to hear a response. Call, response. Right? So these are real long kind of extensions of all of these things, and that's how you end up with a blues that is so long. And I'm going to point to these things on here as they occur. All right, that's Mika Brueggemann on the Barry sax. Anyway, it's a really extended form, and the listener might not really pick up on the idea that it's a blues while listening to it, but it gives the whole thing a sense of direction, at least for you as you're writing. Or it gave me a sense of direction of like a logic, and that's always helpful. If you've got logic, then the music is telling you where it wants to go. Otherwise, it can feel like there's just too many choices. So much of creativity is about limitations. If you put limits on yourself, like deciding that it's going to be a blues, then that's going to right away give you an opportunities to make more interesting choices. That's another example of how you can take the form and just expand on everything. So I encourage you, as you're writing blueses this week, to play around with this stuff. Maybe try writing some traditional blues lyrics. That can be super, super fun. And it's nice. I mean, they're just 3 lines, and the first 2 are the same. It doesn't have to be that way, but that can be a way to do it. And you can try writing some real traditional type blueses. You can try writing blueses that don't sound like blueses. Anyway, I encourage you to experiment and have some fun with this. And if you have questions, please, I'm very happy to recommend other things for you to listen to. I'm very happy to answer questions, especially I can answer things about what I'm thinking when I was writing some of these things. I know this was a longer video, but I really wanted to cover this in some more depth. And again, I really encourage you to check out some of those books. Blues People by Amiri Baraka, The Music of Black Americans by Eileen Southern, and The History of Jazz by Ted Gioia. All right, folks, have a good week, and I look forward to hearing your music.